Genesis chapter 38. And it came to pass at that time that Judas went down from his brethren and turned aside to a man of Odolam, whose name was Hira. And Judas saw there the daughter of a man of Canaan, whose name was Sava. And he took her and went into her. And she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. And she conceived again and bore a son, and called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again, and bore a son, and called his name Selom. And he was in Chezib when she bore them. And Judas took a wife for Er his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Er the firstborn of Judas was wicked before the Lord, and God slew him. And Judas said to Onan, Go in to thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan, knowing that the seed should not be his, it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, not to give seed to his brother. And it appeared evil before God, because he did this, and he slew him also. And Judas said to Tamar his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow in the house of thy father, till Selom my son be grown. For he said, Lest he also die, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and sat in the house of her father. And the days were multiplied, and Sava, the wife of Judas, died. And Judas was comforted, and went up to the shearers of his sheep, he and Hira, his shepherd, the Odolamite, to Thamnah. And it was reported to Tamar, saying, Behold, thy father-in-law goes up to Thamnah to shear his sheep. And she put off the garments of her widowhood from her, and put on a veil, and disguised herself, and sat by the gates of Enaim, which are by the way to Thamnah. For she saw that Selom was grown, and he gave her not to him for a wife. And Judas saw her, and thought her to be a harlot, for she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her by the way, and said, Let me come in to thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me, if thou come in to me? And he said, I will send thee a kid of the goats from the flock. And she said, If thou wilt give me a pledge till thou send it. And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Thy ring, and thy bracelet, and thy staff that is in thy hand. And he gave them to her, and went into her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away, and took off her veil, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judas sent the kid of the goats by the hand of his shepherd, the Adulamite, to receive the pledge from the woman, and he found her not. And he asked the men of the place, saying, Where is the harlot who was in Enaim by the way? And they said, There was no harlot here. And he returned to Judas, and said, I have not found her. And the men of the place say, There was no harlot there. And Judas said, Let her have them, but let us not be made a laughingstock. For I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after, that it was told Judas, saying, Tamar thy daughter-in-law has played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judas said, Bring her out, and let her be burnt. And as she was being brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man to whom these things belong, I am with child. And she said, Discern whose are this ring, and bracelet, and staff. And Judas acknowledged them, and said, Tamar is more righteous than I, because I gave her not to Selom my son, and he knew her no more. And it came to pass, when she was in labor, that she had twins in her womb. And it came to pass, when she was in labor, that one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This one shall come out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out. And she said, Why hast thou broken forth a breach for thyself? and she called his name Phares. And after this came out his brother, upon whose hand was the scarlet thread, and she called his name Zara. That concludes this chapter. Please click Next to continue.